Dr. Scott Sherr, when it comes down to gut health, people don't seem to realize that the small intestine, our gut, actually needs fuel itself. Like those cells need fuel. It's not necessarily coming from just carbohydrates or food that we're eating. They operate differently.
Yep.
Like, how does that work? First off, like how can a lack of proper fuel in the gut affect gut permeability, gut health, ultimately the mood? Like how does this work?
Yeah, so our large intestine is fueled by butyrate. Okay, so your main source of fuel for your large intestine is actually butyrate. So butyrate is made in a lot of different ways, but butyrate is the main fuel, okay? In the small intestine, the main fuel is actually glutamine. And what people don't realize is that the fuel, what that means is that the cells in your gut, in your small intestine, require glutamine to work, to make energy, to function. And those cells are just one layer thick. So your cellular wall, your cell wall of your gut is not very thick. People think it's like this massive, when you look at like a big tube or something like that. No, it's one cell thick. And then there's all these other things that are inside the small intestine that are like your immune cells and other types of cells that are there to help protect you. The way to think about the gut is it's basically outside of your body, okay? Our first immune system that was developed was inside of our gut. The first neurons and connections and like synapses and things like that, like were made in your gut because they had to understand what was happening from the outside world, okay? So our gut is kind of where everything starts and begins for most people. And if your gut is not working well, the whole system starts crashing because the gut is protecting you from the outside world. And if you're allowing things to come in from the outside world because you have a leaky gut, because you're not getting enough maybe fuel for those cells, or there's inflammation, or there's infection, or whatever it might be, that all kind of goes together, you'll find that the system starts getting dysregulated because all those things that were supposed to be kept out of your body start coming in when the gut gets leaky.
Interesting. So what are some ways, like just getting right down to brass tacks, that you can kind of help support that? Because it's not just about the food that you're eating. I also put a link down below for a company that makes a C15 for people that don't eat a lot of cheese or people that want to get those C15 levels up. A lot of their research was funded by the United States Navy. They have some really interesting stuff. It's a company called Fatty 15. I've talked to Dr. Ven Watson multiple times, and I've even interviewed her on this channel. She is who really is one of the people that kind of started discovering this deficiency in dolphins. But this is something that's been talked about across the literature for a long time, but only recently has become sort of household information. I put a link down below for you to try Fatty 15 if it's something that's of interest to you. I think it's a very important compound. It is a form of saturated fat. So it's not like we're talking anything really weird here. It's a saturated fat that we would get from good quality cheeses, but the amount of cheese you'd have to eat to get our levels back up, and again, this is a real deficiency, would be a lot of cheese. So that link is down below. It's a 15% off discount link, top line of the description underneath this video. I highly encourage you to at least go there and read some of the literature. It's fascinating.
Well, a lot of this has to do with, there's so many different components to this, right? So if you have a gut that's leaky, there's so many different reasons why that might be the case, right? So if your gut is not doing a good job keeping things out and maintaining things in the gut and then letting them go if they're not supposed to be there, it's probably because there are a number of factors all kind of related to the final issue, which is inflammation in the gut. And what happens if you have a lot of inflammation is that those cells that are aligning the gut are not getting the fuel that they need, and then they start opening up and they start to let things in. And as a result of that, you're starting to get leaky gut and you get all these inflammatory things that happen as a result of that. So, and the key fuel there for our gut cells is glutamine as well. And that's a very important amino acid, as you know. So
okay, because I know glutamine from sort of the bodybuilding world where it doesn't really do diddly squat, right? Yeah. From a muscle building perspective, it's not essential. It's not, it's created. So like, why do we really need it to build muscle? And I think that's been demonstrated to largely not do anything. But there's this other side of glutamine that people don't always realize. And I know there's the endurance side. There's also just flat out just other sides in general. Like from the endurance perspective, it's like, I don't know if people realize, and this isn't just for endurance athletes, like it's all relative, right? Like if someone is not accustomed to doing more cardio and all of a sudden they do more cardio, or they start an exercise regime and they start kind of depleting these glutamine levels, this has an impact on their gut health,
Yes.
which then has an impact on subsequent other things.
Yes. So many athletes that I've worked with over the years have their guts are trash. And that's because they're depleting all of their amino acids, but the one that's most important is going to be the glutamine for their gut. And so they get leaky gut as a result of just being over-exercised. And then they're getting diarrheal symptoms, they're getting abdominal symptoms. So I worked with a guy recently at the Leadville race, which is like the ultra marathon in Colorado where I live. And he was complaining to me like every year that he tried it 2 years before, at least 1 year, maybe 2 years, where he gets severe diarrheal symptoms. And like, this is a big problem with people doing a lot of these bigger races, and they get a lot of GI distress. Why is this? Then there's lots of different reasons, but one of the reasons is that they're depleting all of their amino acids because they're doing these huge races. And the main one that's keeping their gut intact is glutamine. So what we did with him this year was we had him take about 4 to 5 grams of glutamine every 4 hours. And he ran the race in 3 hours less than he did the year before, and no GI symptoms at all. So it's underutilized and underappreciated, the importance of glutamine, maybe not from a muscle building perspective, but from a gut integrity perspective while you're trying to build muscle and get stronger and do these ultra marathons and things like that.
And I think it makes sense, like from a, any kind of evolutionary perspective. Like people might say like, well, why? I don't want to, I want to do it all with food. I want to do it. It's pretty unnatural to go out and run 100 miles.
Yeah.
Right. So I mean,
the first guy that did the 26 miles, the marathon died. Right.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Yes, maybe we've adapted and we're better at doing some of these, extreme things. But
Yeah.
what I'm curious is how quickly does gut damage occur? Like, I mean, if someone, let's say, I go out and I run 20 miles.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's even make it like more relatable. Let's say like someone that's doing a couch to 5K goes out and they run a 5K, right?
They're all going to need more glutamine, man.
Yeah.
Especially, and you need it as well when you're doing those 20 milers and things like that. We see this even, the biggest place we see it actually is in people that get surgery. People that just get laid up in the hospital, they need a lot more glutamine overall to support their gut. And in general, they don't get enough. And so we've looked at there's good studies that show that if you increase and supplement with glutamine, they don't lose as much muscle mass and their gut doesn't get as leaky either. And they don't get such inflammation issues as a result of that. So even just a couple of days in the hospital can be detrimental to your gut integrity because you are inflamed and then you're sitting in bed and you're like you're losing lean body mass by just sitting there too. So opposite extremes apply here. So if you're doing a lot of energy metabolism, a lot of work, you're going to require a lot more glutamine as well. Not for your muscle tissue as much, but for your gut. And that's what people don't think about as much. So oftentimes we have people sipping glutamine post-operatively. This is not in the conventional world, but in the more alternative side, like up to 20 grams a day in some people, depending on the situation.
So it can happen pretty quick. So I mean, it's just like like if someone goes out and never run a 5K before they run it, then it's basically depleting actively.
Yes.
What happens? The term leaky gut, intestinal permeability is thrown around so much and I shouldn't say overhyped because I don't think it's overhyped. I think it's very important, but it's over marketed, right? So it's like it's talked about in the wrong circles, the wrong people where they burnt out that term. Yeah. But it's a very real thing. And I think, you and I talked like when I had my a parasite last year and like it was really messed me up. Like there was, immune system things that happened downstream of that. There's all kinds of stuff that happened downstream of that. Yeah. What happens when your gut is permeable?
So when your gut's not doing what it's supposed to do, it's allowing that outside world to come in. And that's usually going to cause significant amounts of immune system activation overall. And that's usually not going to be a good idea also because it's also going to cause your brain to get leaky as well. So once there's a lot of immune activation, there's a lot of inflammation because all these little particles and things like that shouldn't have come in from the gut are now in the system. Maybe it's too big of a protein. Maybe it's too big of a carbohydrate. Maybe it's a parasite, or maybe it's something else that came in because you had more of a leaky kind of gut. Then the whole system gets more inflamed. And then as an inflammatory responses occur, you have inflammation in other areas of the body, including your brain, which is what I've seen the most actually over the years is that once your gut gets leaky, your brain gets leaky. And then your brain allows things to get across that weren't supposed to get there. So this is when people get, reactivations of things like Epstein-Barr or Lyme or mold that were never an issue. And then all of a sudden it could happen where you have a massive inflammatory response that causes the leaky gut itself, or you can have issues within the gut itself that cause inflammation that maybe the food, maybe toxins, maybe medications, environmental stuff that cause the gut to be leaky on its own that cause an inflammatory response in the rest of the system. So it can go either way, if that makes sense.
So mechanistically, if like exercise endurance work kind of depletes the glutamine,
yes,
how does how does stress? Is it working along the same pathway? I mean, is there a physical change that occurs like through exercise that causes this depletion? But compare that to someone that's like chronically stressed, and that's kind of contributing to a leaky gut.
So the chronic stress is a little bit different, right? But it's similar in some ways, because if you're chronically stressed, you're activating your sympathetic nervous system. Your sympathetic nervous system is like your fight or flight. It's like running from a lion kind of nervous system. If that's not the place that we digest very well, as you know. Most of the people, actually, what happens when an animal is in danger, it shits itself and it runs, right? So that it's like this massive response of like just clamping down and then going. So you don't digest very well if you're in sympathetic overload. So if you're massively stressed all the time, you're not going to be able to have the rest and digest. And so you're not going to be able to get enough blood flow to your intestines to actually get enough digestion to happen. So that's when people get bloating, they don't get digestion well, they get bacterial overgrowth, all those kinds of things, because they're always in sympathetic response. It's a different response than the stress of exercise, which is just an acute stress that's depleting things like glutamine. And as a result of that, you're getting a higher incidence of things like leaky gut. But the chronic stress that's happening and the sympathetic dominance that you're getting, you can't digest your food that way.
Interesting. And there's is that one of the reasons why people maybe don't sleep so well? Like, I mean, I know there's an interplay between glutamine, glutamate, and GABA, right?
Yeah.
Because they kind of work sort of in opposition / synergistically with each other.
So we have glutamine, which is your amino acid. Then you have glutamate, which is also amino acids, but glutamine can be converted into glutamate. Glutamate is also our primary excitatory neurotransmitter in the brain. So glutamate gets across the blood-brain barrier very easily, and that's about keeping you on. It's your energy, it's your focus. This is, of course, dopamine and norepinephrine are involved, but glutamate is actually the primary that people don't know about. But then glutamate gets converted into GABA in the brain. And then glutamate requires vitamin B6 and magnesium to do that. So you have to have those cofactors to be able to convert your glutamate to your GABA in the brain. And GABA is, of course, really important for relaxing and calming you down and helping you sleep. If you have too much glutamate compared to GABA, you're going to feel more energy. You're not going to be able to sleep. You're going to be irritable, insomnia, all those kinds of things. So it's really important that your gut's working, so that your gut is getting glutamine and it's doing what it needs to do, so you don't get leaky gut and inflammation. Because inflammation is going to screw up your neurotransmitters as well in various ways, including GABA. But it's also important you're getting enough glutamine for the rest of the body as well, not just your gut. So if you have a leaky gut, you need more glutamine, not only for your small intestine, but for the rest of your body, especially for your conversion over to GABA, so you can actually sleep. And so if you're depleted in your gut, you need more glutamine. And if you have a leaky gut, you need more glutamine. And then if you need that much more, you're also going to need more so you can get into the system, so you can actually convert it over to GABA as well. And this is the irritability that you have with a lot of people that have a leaky gut or that are depleted overall in GABA, is that they just don't have enough to maintain and help with them with their mood along with their sleep.
Interesting. Yeah, because on the surface, you would think, okay, glutamine would be the opposite of what you would need. If it's going to feed glutamate, and that's going to make you more excitable. So it's actually,
but you need more glutamate to make enough GABA, right? So it's a thing where you need enough of the precursor. It's a balance between those two things, right? So if you don't have that balance, you're going to have an overabundance of glutamate. You're going to be screwed because you're not going to be able to sleep. You're going to have tremors. So you have to not only make sure that you're getting enough glutamine, but also the cofactors that are responsible for the conversion, which is your vitamin B6 and your magnesium. So that's also very important for people, of course. And then, most of the foods that we eat now are depleted in a lot of those kinds of minerals, especially magnesium. Many of us are magnesium deficient, as you know, as well. And so I often have my patients taking magnesium at night, along with maybe vitamin B6. But usually I'm checking levels for that kind of thing, because you can take too much B6 as well, which is not always a good thing. So,
yeah. So if you're trying to if you have too much glutamate, actually, let's back up for a second. I think people can understand a little bit more of what glutamate is when they think of like MSG.
Yeah, that's a great example. Yeah.
And I don't want to put MSG on the spot, because I know that people get sensitive about their MSG, but I can honestly say in my personal experience, I don't sleep when I have MSG.
Exactly.
I'm very wired, and I know I'm not alone in that. And I know that it's difficult to talk. People do get very sensitive when you talk about their MSG, and I'm not bashing MSG, but it's just.
I didn't think it was that controversial. I thought everybody hated MSG.
I had one guy one time put me on. He was a very well known food star from that, what is that? Ugly Delicious, that show. Massive following on Twitter. I did a video that was talking about, it wasn't even negative about MSG. It was really just talking about a couple of the studies. There's one particular study that was literally called Chinese food syndrome. And talked about the effects of MSG on the brain. And he just I mean, the things he called me, I mean, I don't even want to say them on YouTube, right? It was just like,
I mean, was it just a shock value? Or?
Because there was a perceived attack on a particular...
Like the umami flavor, right?
Yeah,
I understand, yeah.
It was like, okay, gotcha. Well, that wasn't... But the bottom line is that if you look at how MSG works in the body, like it's I'm not even saying it's good, bad, or ugly. It's just what it is, right?
Yeah, and your experience is very, very common, because if you flood the system with MSG or glutamate sources, it doesn't have to be MSG. Like a good one that's very highbrow is caviar. Caviar has lots of MSG. Yeah. So if you have any high glutamate containing foods, like some of the harder cheeses as well, head eggs are common, and head eggs are a very common sign that you're overabundant in that glutamate, versus your glutamine. So, versus your GABA, excuse me. So you have your glutamate that's high, and it's having a hard time converting itself over to GABA, and as a result of that, you get those symptoms that you were describing, right? So it's always a fine balance. Our body is always in this balance, right? And it's trying to rebalance itself when we have these stresses, and that can be good. But sometimes it requires you to be thinking about, well, maybe I can't get all of this from food. I really have to think about how I can support my glutamine system with higher levels of glutamine if I have more symptomatic leaky gut, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, those kinds of things. And then also maybe you have to support your GABA system too, not only by working on the glutamine sources, but how are you increasing the GABA as well in various ways? And you can do that, primarily by improving how the GABA receptor is working and supporting it, while you're working on the dietary changes and working on the leaky gut. But, oftentimes we want to help people right now because they're having symptoms. And so you can often support the GABA system by giving things that support GABA at the same time as working on their leaky gut and working on their glutamine and their conversion from glutamate into GABA as well. So with your vitamin B6 and magnesium.
Yeah. And I know, separately, I'll put a link down below to, you guys' project and transcriptions and what you guys do with that, because there's some interesting stuff that I've talked about on this channel before. With like control column and ways to increase GABA levels, which is really interesting, something that I've been a big fan of for a long time. Yeah,
we're a big fan of looking at the GABA receptor in a very novel way, not just what's going to be binding the receptor in some allosteric way, which is like around the receptor, but what are you actually doing to make sure that GABA doesn't get deficient or depleted? And most of my patients are GABA deficient, but no doctor ever asks them about it. And because nobody thinks that if somebody is depressed or anxious or can't sleep, that it could be a GABA deficiency, but it could. And so if you can support the GABA system in this holistic way, right, looking at supporting the GABA receptor by enhancing not only just what's binding to it on these other sites, but also GABA itself, along with, magnesium and B6 and that conversion over to glutamate to GABA, like that's a bit of a longer process for people. But if you do them together, like you can get people sleeping and feeling better, like their mood regulated, their overall just feeling of just comfort in themselves just go up so much. Because if you're overabundant in glutamate, especially, like you're just jittery, you're edgy all the time, like you're not a fun person to be around, right? So like that's not what we want to be, and show up for our spouses and our kids and things. And just supporting that GABA system can go so far in helping them. And so Trocom is a big one for that. But in general, my perspectives, as you know, Tom, is that I really want to support the system as much as possible. So like looking and testing vitamins and minerals and nutrients, looking at their copper and their zinc level is really important as well to make sure the receptor is working. Magnesium, B6 is as well really, really important, as well as the glutamine levels. So
I mean, even if it's one of those things that's just a pattern interrupt for someone to be able to get off that ledge and be able to do the inner work that they need to do, it's like that's kind of what it is for me. It's like I don't like to rely on things, but I do also know that there's part of that internal sort of wisdom that you have to listen to sometimes, is that, hey, yes, there is a time and a place where I need to intervene or need an intervention. And that's where you can have something else step in, whether it's glutamine, whether it's transcriptions, whether it's, whatever the intervention is to get you to that place where you're in the headspace where you can do the work to get yourself right. Because I think people don't realize how important the mental and emotional side of this is with the gut too.
100%. And that's always my perspective too. And in fact, we have a nonprofit organization. It's called Health Optimization Medicine and Practice. It was formed in 2017. Dr. Ted Achacoso is the founder. He's also the founder of Transcriptions. And the key was optimizing health instead of treating disease. Okay, most people out there are looking at treating a disease, looking at the root cause of illness, and that's okay. But if you're not focused on how to keep people healthy, how to keep those cells healthy, that's the foundation, that's the ground of it all. But while you're doing that, while you're looking at optimizing vitamins, minerals, nutrients, circadian rhythms, exposures, relationships, you name all of these things, these are really important. It can take a long time to feel better. It can take, if you've the common scenario is that somebody wants to feel better tomorrow, but it took them 40 years to feel the way they do, right? So they can't expect that tomorrow they're going to feel better. But that's why Transcriptions was developed as a way to help people, right now while they're on that longer path to optimizing their health, which takes a while. Like I want to optimize my B6 and magnesium levels in my patients. I want to optimize their gut, but I've had it take years to optimize people's guts in some cases. If you have to deal with parasites, and then you have to deal with bacterial overgrowth, and then you have to do various kinds of things, and then you have to have, of course, compliance as well, and people are doing the things, but it can take a lot of time. So what are you going to do in the interim? Like you said, like the glutamine, or maybe a Transcriptions product could help you, or lots of different things can help overall. Maybe going on a meditation retreat, like just becoming more parasympathetic, just relaxing a little bit can really, really help as well. And like we said, calming down is usually the answer to most problems. So
yeah, agreed, man. Well, I'll link out to everything down below, and then otherwise, where can people find you?
So Transcriptions is a good place. So transcriptions.com is where we have some of our products. I'm personally on Instagram at Dr. Scott Sherr, DrScottSherr. That's probably where I do most of my work overall. So
perfect. Thanks, man.
All right. Thank you.